Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar on ADA accommodations and disclosure, taking charge of your return to work. Thank you for joining us. My name is Katie Law, and I'm a public education coordinator with the Brain Injury Alliance of New Jersey. The Alliance is a nonprofit organization with a mission to provide education, awareness, prevention strategies, advocacy, and support for those who have been affected by brain injury. This webinar is a four-part series. My apologies. Is a four-part series on navigating work after a brain injury. Part two of this series, SSI, SSDI, and work, understanding how employment and benefits can work together, is scheduled for Tuesday, February 10th from 12 to 1. Parts 3 and 4 are scheduled for Tuesday, February 17th and February 24th, respectively. These will address the topics of assistive technology and supported employment. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. All attendees' microphones have been muted. If you have any questions during today's webinar, please type them in the Q&A box. You may also feel free to use the chat feature as our speaker is prepared to answer questions on the fly in the chat if you have something that pertains. And the webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing on the BIANJ website. At the end of the webinar, a link for a post-webinar survey will be placed in the chat. We value your feedback, and so we encourage you to complete that survey, and you must complete the survey to receive a certificate of attendance. And once you complete the survey, you will automatically receive an email. So our presenter for today's webinar is Dr. Bethany Chase. Dr. Bethany Chase is a senior training and consultation specialist at the Boggs Center on Disability and Human Development, where she provides training and consultation to disability professionals, advocates with lived experience, and families on best practices in employment, meaningful day, transition to adulthood, sexuality, aging, grief, and loss. Dr. Chase's achievements include numerous state and national conference presentations, multiple peer-reviewed publications, and several Boggs Center resources that have been promoted nationwide. Before joining the Boggs Center, she spent over a decade as chair of the transition department at the Cook School and Institute in New York City, where she supported hundreds of students with developmental disabilities and their families in planning purposeful, inclusive lives of their choosing. Dr. Chase earned her doctorate from Rutgers University School of Social Work, her master's degree from Columbia University School of Social Work, and her bachelor's degree in music therapy from Berklee College of Music. I am very pleased to welcome Dr. Chase.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Oops, hold on. Wrong share. Here we go. All right, there we go. All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here today. I just also want to quickly say I have kind of a whole mission control set up here so I can see all of you or most of you or some of you, and I can see the chat box and I can see my workshop. So while I'm going through, if you have a quick question, please go ahead and do use the chat. Sometimes I'm able to quickly clarify something, or else I can kind of let you know that I'm going to get to a point later. I'm also just a big fan of the chat. If you have a thought, you want to share something, go ahead and share it. Share it to each other, share it to me. I welcome, puns as well are always appreciated. So it's always a bit more enjoyable when people feel like they're together as a group. So by all means, take advantage of that chat feature. So today we're going to be talking about the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, accommodation and disclosure as people consider what their options are when they decide maybe they want to try returning to work after a brain injury. So today we are going to learn broadly about the Americans with Disabilities Act. We're going to talk about what accommodations may be helpful for individuals with TBI, and how to kind of work the ADA so that it can help you secure the accommodations that you need for success. Before we go any further, I would love to just practice using this chat feature and just let me know, who's here today. I know that, in this group, we might have individuals themselves who are considering return to work, professionals, family members. Sometimes we have employers who are interested in this kind of content. So I would love in the chat, if you can, to just go ahead and share. Oh, someone's saying that the chat feature is not, it says it's disabled on their end. Interesting. I wonder if there's a way to have the chat feature work. I don't think I have control over that on my end, but maybe Katie, I don't know if you can turn on the chat feature or not. I can see the Q&A, but I don't know if you all can see each other's comments. So, so it might not work that way. Let's see.
Yeah, I have the chat feature. I do see the Q&A, and I see someone does not have it. If you maybe click the more icon, it might show up there.
I think because it's not my meeting, I don't think that I can turn on the chat feature. It's been when you set up the meeting, the chat was disabled. I'm not sure if it can be turned on since we've already started the Zoom.
But it says chat disabled.
Yeah.
So
I'll
Chris
keep
might be
going
able
and
to
you
work
can,
on that.
yeah, you can fiddle with it. If not, I don't know if you all can see each other in the Q&A or if it's just me that can see you all. Okay, so you can't see each other. All right, so I'll just let you know it's a mix so far of folks here for personal reasons and professional reasons. I see that there's a DBRS counselor here. Oh, I know you. Hello. Let's see, Dawn Hale. Okay, I see lots of familiar names as well. Excellent. So I can see, yes, I can see you, but you can't see each other. So if there's something that pops up that I think is really good to share with the group, I'll just go ahead and read it out. All right, so we've got some folks here who have brain injuries themselves and some here who are professionals to learn more about it. Excellent. So we'll make sure that we cover all of our bases and speak to the wider audience that's here. Before we go further, I'm going to start off with just a quick video about the Americans with Disabilities Act and where it came from. And this was from the 25th anniversary.
Growing up, we would talk about the American dream and work hard, study hard, and you could move forward. But if you had a disability, working hard and study hard didn't really mean you'd get anything.
I went and applied for a daycare job to be a teacher's assistant. The teachers liked me, and then they found out that I had been in special ed, and all of a sudden the job was no longer available.
My older brother became deaf at a young age. I think he was maybe 6 years old. His life was circumscribed by people saying, well, you're deaf, so you can't do this, you can't do that. They told him he could be one of three things. He could be a baker, a shoe cobbler, or a printer's assistant. He said, I don't want to be any of that. They said, okay, now you're a baker.
Ed just had a way of inspiring people to be what they needed to be. But he was a scared kid going off to college. It was just this terrifying idea, they're all going to look at me. And then he realized they could look at him and he could be a star. Of course, it opened the doors to people who had kids with disabilities.
I wanted to be a teacher. My written, oral, and medical exam all were given in inaccessible buildings, and my friends carried me up and down the steps. And then I was failed on my medical exam because I couldn't walk, and I really couldn't let it drop. Friends of mine and I decided that what we would do is we would set up this group.
I got a flyer in Braille, which I'd never received before. It said something like, fight for your civil rights.
That was really the beginning of advocacy.
I never knew that there was such thing as, being proud of being a disabled person.
It was everybody really beginning to demand respect and the right to be able to do with their life what other people do and don't have to think about.
This one person said to me one day, we got left out. I said, left out of what? They said the Civil Rights Act. You can't discriminate against people of color or women or sex or national origin, but disability, perfectly legal. I became aware then of a movement to have a broad civil rights bill to cover all people with disabilities. We had this wonderful point in time when we had the President of the United States strongly in back of it.
We will not tolerate discrimination in America. I now lift my pen to sign this Americans with Disability Act and say, let the shameful wall of exclusion finally come tumbling down.
The biggest impact of ADA has been the change in the physical environment. Everything from curb cuts to widened doors to seating in theaters.
Buses are accessible. It means that people can actually get to their job. There's consciousness around accessible restrooms and hotel room doors.
It has spawned a whole bunch of new technology.
Portable respirators came out, motorized wheelchairs came out.
Technology has transformed the lives of deaf individuals like myself.
For those with intellectual developmental disabilities, technology is what allows them to participate.
People with disabilities can work and can be a part of their community.
You're seeing people with physical disabilities actually coming out to play high school sports.
I gained a real understanding of the ADA and what it symbolized.
We have the right to do everything and anything that we want, and it's because of the ADA.
If my brother were alive today, I think now he would think that more people like him now have a better shake, more fair shake. Happy 25th years of ADA.
All right, so now the ADA is over 35 years old, but I think this is a great video that shows where this law came from, and it really was a landmark piece of legislation in terms of ensuring that folks with disabilities are able to be included and accommodated at the workplace. So we're going to talk about how this might work for you in your situation, or for if you're a professional, for the individuals that you are supporting. So right off the bat, sometimes people will just ask, does the ADA cover a brain injury? Or we get this question a lot at the Boggs Center about a variety of different disabilities. So it's important to know that the ADA doesn't have like a list of definitive disabilities and medical conditions that either, you're in or you're out. It doesn't quite work that way. What the ADA does is that basically prompts us to ask, does the employee, does the individual have an impairment of some kind, a disability, an impairment, a medical condition? And does this impairment substantially limit a major life activity? That's really where the ADA starts from. It's not like a list. So right from the beginning, working for accommodations under the ADA is about a conversation and a reflection on what it is you want to do and what are the barriers that you're experiencing as you try to do that thing. So, a brain injury can show up at work in a lot of different ways. So those of you who have a brain injury yourself, this certainly is not news to you. What professionals sometimes don't realize is how different this might be from other disabilities, particularly if you're working with somebody who had a brain injury as a child. A lot of times they can enter these supports where there isn't a lot of understanding of the difference between what they might be struggling with and what somebody with a different kind of disability might be experiencing. So brain injury can show up a lot as fatigue. There can be visual changes, memory, physical changes. Sometimes there's trouble with attendance, with problem solving, working with others, handling stress and emotion, concentration, staying organized, meeting deadlines, and general challenges around change. So things like around visual, for example, this could be like sensitivity to bright lights or the lights on in a big office. It can cause headaches, eye strain from a lot of screens. Screens often have to be limited. There could be blurry or double vision, difficulty with tracking lines of text, scanning a page, just generally finding items visually can be really challenging. Physical issues could be things like balance, dizziness, unsteadiness, maybe weakness, often on one side, things like motor difficulties, fine motor difficulties, and then connected a lot with the visual, things like headaches, nausea, just general sensory overload. Memory also can be a challenge. So this could be just forgetting steps, even in a task that you know pretty well. Sometimes all of a sudden a step might be missing, or remembering things that were said in meetings or directions from a supervisor. So just trouble with like remembering details, things that maybe you even think that you had, and then all of a sudden are fuzzy again. And so a lot of these kinds of things can affect issues like attendance. So this could be from needing appointments or just unpredictable symptom flare-ups. And this is the part where this is different than, I know there's a lot of folks here from, I saw a lot of DVRS counselors, for example, that there's a big difference in often these attendance issues with someone with, say, a developmental disability versus a TBI, because things can sort of flare up. It's not just steady. There's a lot more of ebb and flow. So things like sleep disruption, you know, for someone without a TBI, maybe you're a little fuzzy that day, but for someone with a TBI, it can cause all kinds of problems that maybe they didn't have a few days ago. So this is, you know, all of these things can show up at work. For some folks, it might just be one or two of these. For some folks, they might be having more issues broadly, but these are a lot of things that are needed and tasks and skills that are needed at work. So when looking at how people can use ADA to support us, we have to think about the fact that a lot of these things aren't static, right? It's not like every single day the person struggles with the same thing. There might be, you know, good days and bad days, and when setting up accommodations, that can be a bit tricky sometimes. So after a brain issue, as I said, the issue is not often someone's ability, but performance under strain, performance under stress. And so work performance can differ from day to day and times a day, etc. So let's now think about what the ADA can do, what accommodations and what modifications might be helpful if someone's thinking about returning to work. So first things first. Before we can talk about what accommodations can be put into play, the first thing that somebody has to ask themselves, regardless of their disability, is, do I disclose or do I not to disclose? All right. That is the question. To disclose or not to disclose, that is the question. So what do I mean by that term disclosure? So disclosure in this context means basically to tell your employer about your disability. Disclosure is not required. This is a choice. You do not ever have to disclose if you don't want to. You might choose to disclose if you need accommodations, or if you need to explain what the ADA calls an unusual circumstance. And this is pretty much, again, just like if it's something that happens to you, just a challenge that happens to you, or just a phenomenon that happens to you that doesn't seem to happen to everybody else, and you know that it's because of your TBI, that's what's considered an unusual circumstance. It's to explain why something might be different for you than it is for other people. So at the end of the workshop, we're going to talk about how exactly you might ask for accommodations. But the first question to ask, and the first thing to ask yourself is this something that I want to disclose? You can't, you can ask for an accommodation without a disclosure, but if it's something that's really a sort of a big accommodation or a big modification, your employer can just say no. And then at that point, you might have to be like, actually, here's why I'm asking, right? I need this flexible schedule. I need, you know, whatever it is that you're asking for because of this. You can't ask for it if you don't explain why. And then that's when you may choose to disclose, but you do not have to disclose. If you've decided to disclose because you want to move forward with trying to get certain accommodations and modifications at the job, then we kind of go into where the ADA will cover you and will help assist you in this process. So the Americans with Disabilities, we're going to kind of unpack the law a little bit. What it does is it protects qualified individuals with disabilities, including brain injuries, from employment discrimination. So an employer can't say, I really don't want to deal with this whole disability thing, so we're just not even going to look at this candidate, even though they're qualified. That is against the law. You cannot do that. However, it doesn't say that you are guaranteed a job just because you have a disability. You must be qualified for the job. So it protects qualified individuals from employment discrimination. Now, what exactly is a qualified individual? A qualified individual is someone who can carry out the essential functions of the job. Now, what are essential functions? Okay, so an essential function is the basic job duties that an employee must be able to perform with or without a reasonable accommodation. So, how do we know if a function is essential? Whether the reason exists is the reason the position exists is to perform that function. So, for example, if a place is hiring a calculus teacher, you must be able to do calculus because that's the reason the position exists, right? You can't say, oh, you're hiring for a calculus teacher. I have a disability and math is tricky for me. So I'd like to apply for the calculus position, but I'm only going to be teaching mathematics. Can't do that, right? Because the position exists to perform that function. That could also be something like a car mechanic, right? The whole reason the position exists is because they need to be able to fix cars. So you can't apply for the job and get an accommodation to do something else. The number of other employees that can perform it. So this one's kind of interesting. So a good example of this question is, let's say that you're interested in working in retail, but cash register, making change, all that stuff is tricky for you, or you don't want to be in front of any kind of computer screen whatsoever. If you're working at a big department store, let's say you're at a Macy's or a Target or something, or Kohl's, right? It's a big department store, and there are some people at the cash register. There are some people in the changing rooms. There are some people in stocking. Then you don't have to be able to work the cash register because there's lots of people at work that day, and they just don't give you that spot. But you can't go to a little tiny mom and pop shop where there's only one, maybe two people working and say, I want to work here, but I can't run the cash register because who else will? If not you, who? So if it's a big team, they can often spread those responsibilities out. If it's a small team, sometimes you have to be able to do everything. And last but not least, a specific degree of expertise or a certification is required. So this is actually very similar to the calculus position. If you have to be certified, you can't say, I'm going to go, I want to, give family therapy, but I'm not certified as a family therapist, but I have a disability, and so I want an accommodation. Doesn't work that way, right? If you need to do the job and be certified to do that job, that's a requirement. That's an essential function of the job. Now, it's not always so clear. All right, so I can't see that my chat's acting funny. Some of you I can see, some of you I can't. I think some of you can see everybody and some of you can't. In my chat, I can see some people are able to text to everybody and some people can't. So put it in there anyway, because I think I can see everything, but I just want to take a quick poll. What do you think? Do you think it is essential, an essential function of the job? If you work at a coffee shop, is it an essential function of the job to sort of smile and be pleasant to your customers? What do you think? I know some of you I can see everything. So if you can't see, I'll kind of let people know. All right, we're coming in hot with some no's and yeses. All right, yes, yes, no, no, yes, no. All right, we're getting a whole bunch of different yeses and no's and yes and no's and yes and no's. Perfect. All right, so the answer is this is a trick question. So, haha, I got you. It is a trick question. The answer is it could be. I think somebody said no, unless it is. And that's basically exactly the right answer. Um, so it could be. It depends. So how many of you, I'm curious, have ever shop at Trader Joe's? Ever go to Trader Joe's to get groceries? If you have gone to Trader Joe's, you have probably noticed that everyone there has to be super friendly. And it's funny because people who don't really think about it from this perspective just think that it must be such a great place to work because everybody's so happy. So I'm sorry to burst your bubble if you think it's just must be the wonderful place to work. And it really might be a great place to work, but that attitude is an essential function of the job at Trader Joe's. It's in their hiring requirements. You have to. So another example, I used to work in the city, in New York City, and I used to get my coffee at a place called Pret a Manger, which is kind of like a really fancy, like bougie Panera, basically. And I used to go there every morning to get my coffee. They have really good coffee. But when you go in there, everyone is so pumped. They're so excited about serving you their coffee. I feel like they've had like shots of espresso back there to the point where like I would worry about them a little bit, like blink twice if you need help. Like, is everything okay back there? Because they were so excited. It's like 6:30 in the morning. I was working at a high school. It was very early. Um, and like so excited. And I just always assumed that it was kind of like Trader Joe's where they had to. And then you kind of compare that to where I work at the Bog Center in New Brunswick. We're over at Dunkin' Donuts. I don't usually get a smile with my coffee. I mean, I'm lucky if I get my coffee, frankly. So it's interesting. I always tell the story when I talk about essential functions. And one time I had someone whose son, a participant in the class, their son worked at that coffee shop I'm talking about in the city. And she's like, oh yeah, they have to. So it is sometimes, it is sometimes an essential function. Sometimes it depends. Does the employer have it as an essential function? Sometimes employers think something like this is an essential function, and like you're looking over their shoulder and you're like, I don't know. I don't really see a lot of smiling and being pleasant over there. Are you sure? So it's not always an exact science of what exactly is an essential function. So the answer is things could be or they might not be. It really depends on the employer. I always recommend to people that they really make sure that if they're starting to talk about this with the employer, that they really stop and think about it. Is it really an essential function? And is it possible that that essential function could be met with a reasonable accommodation before you just rule it out? So if the individual can't perform the job as currently structured, the employer must make a reasonable accommodation unless doing so would present an undue hardship. So something as simple as putting a sticker of a smiley face next to where you pull off the receipt might be all the reminder that someone needs to smile and say, thank you so much, please come again, right? That's not causing disruption to anybody, but could be the reminder that someone needs. Now, what's an undue hardship? Let's take that apart next. An undue hardship is an accommodation that could be considered too expensive. And again, if you've noticed, there's no dollar sign. It's a lot of the ADA is a lot of gray, where it's about a conversation and it's about an exchange of solutions. But you do not have to do an accommodation if it is considered too expensive. If it is considered too disruptive to an employer's business, then they do not have to do it. So an example might be, let's say a place of business or a place of work is not particularly wheelchair accessible. Somebody can't necessarily say, I need you to overhaul the floor of this business so that I'm able to get around it easier, because that would be very disruptive. I would argue that having an accessible place of work is good for everybody, but at that exact moment, that's not necessarily a demand that they can make. It would require lowering performance standards. So this kind of goes back to essential functions, where if you're making a certain item, if you are teaching a certain class, whatever you might be, whatever the purpose of that job is, you don't have to say, oh, we'll just lower the expectations, we'll lower the performance standards. That's not required for the employer. If it would prevent others from doing their job, that's an undue hardship. Or if it would fundamentally alter the nature or the operation of the business or the job. So an employer, there's nothing, if you notice here, what does too disruptive mean? What does too expensive mean? How exactly does that work? Just curious here if anybody knows who this individual is right here. Anybody recognize this guy? Yeah, it is. It's Stephen Hawking. All right. Excellent. 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 So we put a picture of Stephen Hawking here. If you're not sure who Stephen Hawking is, so he is one of the most brilliant human minds that we have ever known about. So just ever, like in the history of humanness. Just one of the most brilliant people that we know to have existed. He held one of the most celebrated mathematics professorships in the world, position also held by Isaac Newton at the University of Cambridge. And Stephen Hawking had ALS. He passed away probably about 5 years ago now at this point, I think. But, when people say, oh, come on, like it's not rocket science, like for Stephen Hawking, it actually was rocket science. Like he was contemplating things that I don't even understand. Just really very sophisticated, I don't know, smart space time continuum universe rocket science stuff. You can quote me on that. So what's interesting about Stephen Hawking is he's, kind of a unique person in the world. Like you can't just kind of, go find another Stephen Hawking. So while he worked at Cambridge, anything that Stephen Hawking needed to be able to do his job, they provided because he's irreplaceable, right? So the amount of accommodations, the amount of alterations, anything that he needed is something that they could choose to take on. So we put him here because this just goes to show this is so much about negotiation. It's so much about making sure that you have a job that's the right fit for you. An employer doesn't have to create a new job. They don't necessarily have to provide, personal items if they're not things that are provided to other employees. They don't have to take on costs that would pose an undue hardship. But employers often can and do really genuinely try to make something accessible to a valued employee. So a lot of times it's really about that fit. So all of these things have a lot of gray area. Now, as we said before, if the individual can't perform the job as currently structured, an employer must make a reasonable accommodation unless doing so would present an undue hardship. So we talked about undue hardship. Now, what is an accommodation? So in its simplest terms, it's a modification or an adjustment to a job or an environment that enables a person to apply for or perform the job. So yes, apply for, you can start to ask for accommodations as early as the application process to apply for or to perform the job. They are adjustments or modification to the work environment, to the circumstances, to make sure that a person, an otherwise qualified person, can perform the essential functions of the job. These are not always, people think accommodations and they immediately go to these high-tech systems. My colleague will be providing a workshop on assistive technology where we're going to get into some of those technological accommodations, but some accommodations require little to no money and are very low tech. This could be a color-coded filing system, a sticker of a smiley face, turning off the overhead lights, a modified work schedule. There are things that don't require spending of any money. They sometimes just require a little creativity and support to think through it. So everything that could be an accommodation, we always say that they are possibly reasonable. Because again, unless you're in a situation and you're having a conversation with an employer, there's like very few things that we can promise are always going to be reasonable. Most things are possibly reasonable and good to have a conversation with. So assistive technology, modifications of policies and tests. And so these policies could be, where people can work, the times that they can work, their time off that they can take. And I'm going to get into more specific ones in a moment, but these are the kinds of accommodations that are available to folks with a wide range of barriers and disabilities, needing things in accessible format, time off, remote work, a job coach. We're going to talk about supported employment in this series as well. A job coach is a reasonable accommodation. So I'm seeing a question here from Kathleen. Is the employee the one responsible? It's a conversation. So a person, we're going to talk a little bit about this in a minute when we get into how exactly you ask for an accommodation, but not necessarily. But it definitely hurts to have a good understanding of what your needs are, but it's not completely up to the employee to know exactly what it is that they want. So sometimes when we're talking about a brain injury, sometimes the primary goal of an accommodation for a traumatic brain injury is to bridge a skill gap. But sometimes, and I would say a lot of the time, it's to reduce the cognitive load, to reduce what your brain is being asked to do so that you can easily access the skills that you do have. So with that in mind, we're going to go through some specific examples that are often a good fit for folks with brain injury. So the first, changes to schedule. So a flexible work schedule, which could include starting with reduced hours and slowly increasing hours. A lot of people find helpful because sometimes you don't know until you try exactly what kind of schedule needs you're going to have. And so ramping up your hours, starting slow and increasing over time could be a really good accommodation to ask for so that you kind of know what you need and you just want to get started and work it out. You might need extra or longer breaks while at work. You might need more time to learn new responsibilities and duties and more uninterrupted work time so that you're not expected to respond to phone calls and emails and people popping in while also being responsible for a project or need quiet space to get something done. I supported someone, for example, they didn't have a brain injury, but this could certainly be an accommodation where I was assisting them just on I believe it was a Gap or something, it was a Gap or Old Navy, something like that. And they were folding, always kind of just resetting spaces, but they just found it really hard to concentrate on the sales floor. So rather than trying to like bring the folding cart out to the sales floor, which is often where they would do it, we just gathered all of the things that were kind of messy and we'd bring them to the back. She'd fold them in the back and then she'd bring them out and put them away. Something as simple as that. That doesn't cost any money. You didn't have to go buy any technology. She just needed a quiet space. Otherwise, she was just distracted with the noise and the lights and the people. It really helped a lot. So changes to schedule, often very, very helpful. Changes to work environment. So this is limiting distraction to noise, visual stimuli or interruptions, working in a quieter space, keeping the lights off, maybe needing your own office rather than sharing a big open space, on-site job coaching to help with organization skills, extra job training, high intensity white lights instead of fluorescent lights, like again, depending on the person, what kind of lighting is going to be best for them. Use of technology, glare guards for computer monitors to minimize discomfort caused by bright light or glare, software to help stay on tasks, use of audio recordings of meetings and phone calls to decrease demands on memory and processing information. And I got all of these resources. I put the citation right here. I picked some of my favorite ones, but there was a bunch of things there if you want to read more about these ideas as well. So again, some more TBI specific, possibly reasonable accommodations. So written instructions, asking your supervisor rather than popping in and saying, hey, when you get a second, I needed an XYZ. Could they write it down? Could they write an email after a meeting? Could they, making sure that your AI notes are allowed to be on during a Zoom meeting so that everything is written down. That way, if there's just any issue with recalling information, it's written instead. And the expectation is not that you have to remember anything verbal. Checklists are a great way to offload memory. So this could be checklists of any single task. It could be checklists of just certain tasks, but they kind of just help you, stay on task instead of trying to track all the steps. Task sequencing is often a part of checklists. So this means breaking down work into clear steps and putting them in order. So this could be helpful if, multitasking or switching tasks or figuring out what comes next just feels harder. So it's the same job, but the steps are just clear. Memory aids or apps, these can be simple, these can be digital, they can be written. So, I use these all the time myself, calendars, reminders, timers. In the assistive tech, we've got some cool apps to show you all, voice notes, written prompts, anything where you can kind of offload memory is often really, really helpful. So the goal here is that you're not, relying on your brain to remember everything. It's to use tool that can kind of support and offload some of those tasks so that you don't have to have them always right there. So fatigue, I know, is a big one that keeps coming up. So we've discussed flexible schedule a few times. Again, this can be very, very helpful. If you, for example, have, because of sleep disruption or because of medication side effects or brain fog, that sometimes having a later start time can be very, very helpful. So it doesn't mean that you're asking for less work or fewer expectations. It just means being strategic about your work hours so that it's just you're utilizing your skills when you're kind of at your best. Reduced hours or gradual turn, we've discussed that already as well. So jumping right back into a full-time schedule might either be scary or it could lead to burnout or even symptom flare-ups. So like a phase in can often be a lot more sustainable. And then you can kind of find that sweet spot with what's going to work for you. And again, additional breaks. Not asking for avoiding work. You're just looking for ways to recharge. That way you can stay focused. You can keep your accuracy up. Sometimes it can be helpful for just a regulation. So all of these things can be helpful as well. Under communication and support, possibly reasonable accommodations. So just regular check-ins, having someone you can talk to, a good supervisor, a job coach. This is all good for everybody. Everybody could use this. Clear expectations, super helpful, again, for everybody. But sometimes making sure that things are really, really clear. If it's hard for you to read between the lines somewhat, what really should be done, helping prioritize what's the most important thing that need to get done today. That way you're not kind of trying to guess. So very, very, very clear expectations are very helpful. And often one point of contact can be helpful too. So having one person at work that you go to rather than trying to figure out who I go to for all these different needs. And to the professionals on here, I just want to say that one point of contact should not be you, because then you have to be the person assisting that person at work all the time. For professionals here, the goal is to connect them to a person at work that is kind of their go-to person. And your job is to make sure that that connection is solid so that you can fade the support. And this is actually true of all of these areas. Sometimes job coaches who really want to be helpful end up doing all of these things, and there's nobody at the work site that's doing these things, which means now that person will forever need you to be with them at work. And of course, that's not the goal. Okay, So lots of possibly reasonable ideas here. So to request accommodations, so you must obviously make the request to the employer. Complaining about it at home to your partner is not going to help. You definitely have to go and talk to your employer. The accommodation must be related to a medical need or a disability. Others can make the request. So if you are having, let's say you're having some symptom flare-ups, you have a headache or a home, you have migraine, fatigue, whatever it might be, it's okay for a family member or a partner to reach out and try and communicate what's going on. Job coaches, you are able to help make these requests for accommodations. There's nothing wrong with that. In general, I would say, and I would advocate, it's always best for someone to speak on their own behalf and to start that two-way communication, but it's not actually a part of the law. It's not required. But I would say try as much as you can to kind of own the support that you need at work. There are no magic words that are necessary. So you don't have to knock on, your supervisor's door and say, I hereby declare that I am evoking the Americans with Disabilities Act and require the following. There are no magic words. It can be a casual conversation. It can be in writing. It's really flexible. It's not, you're not filing for anything. You're not making a complaint that someone's violating the law. You just are trying to open the door to a conversation. So the format, you don't have to do it in writing. You can if you want to. There's no magic words. You don't have to evoke anything or anyone to start the conversation. The source is flexible. The timing is flexible. You can decide after you've been working somewhere for 5 years that you think you need an accommodation. And at that time, you can disclose your disability and ask for an accommodation. It's never too late. It's never too early. It's completely up to you and what it is that you think that you need to be successful. So it does require, when you're requesting accommodations, that the limitation to job tasks, that there's a link of your limitations, your disability, your brain injury to a job task. There has to be a connection. You have to name that adjustment is needed. Someone asked in the chat before, is it all up to the person? If you're not sure exactly what you need, that's okay. Trial and error is often part of the process, and that is really, really okay. If you happen to know exactly what you need to be successful, great. If you have no idea, it's time to figure it out. You can work together with your employer to figure out what you might need. It does not require diagnosis details. It does not require a full medical history. It does not require explaining the injury event. You don't have to tell your employer what happened. That's none of their business. If you want to, again, it's your information to share with whoever you want to, but you don't have to sit down and tell them what happened. Knowing and referencing the ADA is not required, although it can be a tool. Sometimes employers are not thinking ADA when you go and say, hey, I'm really struggling with XYZ. I need this adjustment. I need this support. They might be like, what are you talking? Like, we don't do that. Saying, I learned about the ADA, like using the ADA in a sentence, or the ADA dropping the Americans with Disabilities Act into a conversation can be a good tool if your employer doesn't seem to realize that they are now part of a conversation that would be covered under the ADA. You can bring it up. You don't have to. So I have diagnosis details with a little asterisk. So there's 2 different kinds of disclosure. There's a functional disclosure where you don't say exactly exactly what it is. You can say, I have a medical condition that affects memory and stamina, and I need an adjustment. That is a choice. You can also say, I have a traumatic brain injury that affects memory and stamina. Both of these are sufficient. It is completely up to you and what it is that you want to say and what you're comfortable with. Your supervisor can ask for documentation. They might not. Sometimes they don't. They might be like, that makes sense. Let's figure this out. Or say no more. Let's figure this out. Or they might say, okay, I'm willing to give you more days home from work, but in order to get that approved from HR, I need to see some documentation, in which case you'll want to provide that documentation. But they can ask for documentation, but they cannot require unnecessary diagnosis details. You don't need to hand over your entire medical form, just whatever connects, the limitation, the challenge that you're having at work with the accommodation that you're asking for. You may need to provide documentation of that. So here's the process of how it goes. So you will, and you notice it's all kind of in a circle here. So different people sort of enter this in different spots. So you might make a request. So they notify the employer of the need for an accommodation. The employer acknowledges that they have received that request. At this point, they might review medical documentation. Again, they might not. They might review the job requirements and think about potential accommodations. You identify those possible accommodations, and then you give them a go. Maybe they help, maybe they don't. You don't have to have this figured out in just your first shot. It might take a while to figure out exactly what you need to be successful. And then you look at the feasibility, effectiveness, undue hardship, and then maybe you need a different one. You reevaluate, but this is the process. If you are looking for more information and support, the JAN Accommodation Network is a really fantastic resource where you can go and you can look at, it's a website, you can go, they have tons of information on brain injury, a ton of information on if you want to submit an accommodation in writing, they have sample letters there for you. You can put in the specific challenge that you're having. If it's fatigue, concentration, memory, and there's a list of a lot of the examples I gave you as possibly reasonable accommodations came from JAN, but also for professionals here, if employers don't seem to know a lot about the ADA, there's a lot of resources that are designed for an employer to read, to understand their responsibilities under the ADA. Huge fan of JAN. They do fantastic work. So this is a website, just Google it, JAN Accommodation Network, it'll pop right up. All right, and that is it. And let's see what we have in the chat or if anybody has any questions. Okay, here we go. I see a couple questions in the chat. Okay, yeah, Tamisha's saying their doctor recommended a slow progression. Yeah, and again, sometimes employers don't realize that that's a really standard recommendation for somebody with a brain injury. And so just even saying, my doctor recommended this because, and again, if you want to disclose because of a brain injury or because of my, impairment, disability, whatever language you're comfortable with, saying ADA sometimes gets employers to realize, oh, okay, I realize what's happening now. And they're often more responsive. But good, I'm glad that that's consistent. Okay, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on individuals who are already working somewhere and then experience TBI and determining if they're able to continue to meet the essential functions of the job. Okay, let's see. If they're already employed somewhere, is an employer allowed to decide they're no longer able to perform essential functions, even if they were to provide accommodations? So, Jackie, my answer here is the same as if it was a new job, but you kind of do have to take a step back and reevaluate. It depends on, it's the same exact process, right? So you'll want to go back and start off with what are the essential functions of the job? What are the barriers this person is having? Can this person meet the essential functions of the job? And if they cannot, can a reasonable accommodation be implemented to meet those essential functions? Sometimes what I think employers need to realize is that this has been a change. And this person might be a bit of a different employee than they were before. But just because they knew them before they had the brain injury doesn't mean that the ADA doesn't apply to them or their situation. If the person is able to still do the essential functions of the job with an accommodation, then they are a qualified individual. It depends if the person is the employer being making assumptions? Is the employer thinking this person can never do this job anymore? Does this person understand that now this person is engaging in a conversation that's covered by the ADA? But it's really the same process. So sometimes you have to sit down with an employer and say, okay, listen, here's where we are now. What are the essential functions? And what are the barriers this person has to meeting those essential functions? And can we figure out if an accommodation exists? It's the same exact process, regardless if it's a new job or an old job. So you're asking, are employers required to trial accommodations? So it's the same process, right? Is the person a qualified person? Can the person do the job with an accommodation? If the answer is yes, then yes. If the answer is you're not sure, then yes, they should try. But it can't be like, okay, they've worked here for 20 years. They just had a brain injury. They're coming back. They want to do the same job that they did before, but they actually no longer are able to do that job. They're not required to find them a new job at the company. It's a nice thing to do, but they're not required to, right? That would be a nice thing. That would be appreciated, but they're not required to do it. So same exact process. I think it's helpful sometimes just to be like, we're going to start from scratch. We're just like starting from the beginning. What are the essential functions? And can this person meet that with or without reasonable accommodation? Okay. All right. Yes, someone's talking about how helpful it was to disclose. It sounds like I asked and asked and I disclosed. So it sounds like, not sure if you disclosed and then they had the accommodation or if you disclosed and they still didn't work with you. This is why sometimes it is helpful to say the words ADA in the conversation. A lot of employers just don't understand that what is being asked for is not some kind of special treatment. This is what the law does. It provides employment access for qualified individuals. And qualified is still qualified, even if you need an accommodation to do the job. But it is a lot of gray. So you have to be persistent. It helps to know a little bit about what you need to be successful, but truly a lot of employers don't realize that you're having a legally protected conversation and you're asking for something under the ADA. If you have a dream employer who's like, no problem, we'll figure it out, great. But if not, I would say start off with casually mentioning the ADA. You can refer them to the Jan Accommodation Network, which talks about their legal responsibilities as employers to follow the ADA. It's not optional. The ADA is the law of the land. It is not a choice. They have responsibilities to follow the ADA. So again, using that language strategically can really help employers think twice before they respond. Okay, and I'm looking at the time and we're just about out. Looks like maybe we have time for one quick questions. Sometimes provide a form for someone to bring to the doctor if at times there's a lot of details. Provide a form. I haven't seen that form. I would have to look at that form to know. If it's just a form that's saying, tell me about this person's, functional limitations, I would really want to know what the form asks. They might have a form just so that like they know what it is when it's coming in, but you do not have to provide your whole medical history to an employer just because they ask for it. You only have to provide the things that were connected. And the ADA does not require a special form. An employer might, but the ADA doesn't. So if you are not comfortable with the questions being asked by the doctor, you can get your own documentation, and that is legally acceptable. The employer might not like it, but that's actually kind of neither here nor there. They can't just decide that they require different paperwork than the ADA. All right.
Yeah,
It
it
is
looks
1
like
o'clock.
lots of good questions coming
Yes.
in, which, thank you so much, Dr. Chase. This was really an informative webinar, and we thank you so much. I will leave up these chat questions, and if there's things that we did not get to, I will email our participants to make sure that everyone got their their questions answered. So thank you again for sharing your expertise. One final reminder, in the chat is the survey. So if you would like a certificate of attendance, please fill out that survey. and we will email you a certificate. Thank you again for attending and for your thoughtful questions and comments. We hope to see you at next week's webinar, where Dr. Chase will join us again to discuss Social Security, work and benefits, and how employment can work together. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.